Chris Johnston, our TSN Hockey Insider. CJ, what is going on, pal?
Well, the Leafs need a new general manager,
They
and they don't
do
have much
need to.
time.
They do need a new general manager. I mean, were you surprised by this? Because there was some theory that the longer this went on, the more unlikely it was he was to return. Obviously, we get the news today that he will not be back as the general manager. Did this catch you off guard a little bit, or were you kind of expecting this news at this point?
Yeah, by the time we got to this morning, it felt like it was swinging in this direction. I mean, look, it's a great job being general manager of the Leafs, and if it takes you this long to decide it's something you want to do, you've probably made the decision in a sense. But if we went back a week, last Friday, I believe it was Game 5 of that Panthers series, and you had told me that Kyle Dubas, wouldn't be back. That probably would have surprised me then. But after having some time to digest what Kyle said Monday and kind of start working my sources a little bit, it became a little more apparent that this is probably where it was going to end up.
So, do you feel like this was more Kyle and him wanting to step away, or did maybe the comments he made kind of ruffle feathers and change the direction of what maybe was coming?
I don't know how this is going to be spun, to be honest. I mean, some have told me it's a team decision. It certainly felt like the decision was in Kyle's hands this week, that there had been talk on a contract extension and that MLSE wanted him back. I don't know ultimately how things fell at the end, but as I say, if you don't know you want that job pretty quickly, it kind of says that you've got to be all in, and no one knows that more than Kyle Dubas. I think that's a little bit what was behind what he said Monday, just that he didn't know if he had what it took to keep doing the job up to the standard required. So I would expect that as he indicated on Monday, that Kyle will take some time off now before jumping into another job somewhere else down the future. And we got 6 weeks here till the draft, give or take, and so the Leafs are going to have to quickly pivot and find their plan B.
So, CJ, we obviously move on very quickly in this business, and we're talking about plan B here. If it's not Kyle Dubas, and it's not going to be Kyle Dubas, if you're Brendan Shanahan, you just spoke about the deadlines that loom with July 1st around the corner, the draft even closer than that. What's your best guess on how the Leafs might sort of approach this GM search, if indeed there even is one?
Well, I think that they're less likely to go with a first-time GM again. That's one thing that I've sort of heard a little bit. So, that would have, apparently, if that's true, take someone like Brandon Pridham out of the running, who's been the assistant general manager here for a lot of years. But, the question for me, and it'll be one that we'll put to Brendan Shanahan in a couple hours' time, is how deep can the search go, and maybe how much work's already been done? That I don't know. But, I would think in these last few days, as they haven't got indication from Kyle Dubas that they want it back, that they had to at least start opening their minds to who and how they would go about conducting a search. But, look, you've got teams like Calgary and Pittsburgh several weeks into GM searches, in some cases done 2 or 3 interviews with some of their candidates. The Leafs are obviously playing catch up a little bit from a time perspective. But I would think with how important this offseason is, whether you're trading some of the big players, whether you're signing them to even bigger deals, you're going to want someone who has experience on the job to handle those set of decisions. And, I think that they'd be tough decisions no matter who you were, but it might be even tougher when you're coming in and not sort of having lived the life behind the scenes and knowing exactly what's gone on here.
Well, that's kind of the interesting little problem they've got here, right, CJ? If you don't want to go with a first-timer again, because, hey, let's face it, Brendan Shanahan was a first-time president. Kyle Dubas was a first-time GM. Sheldon Keefe, a first-time NHL coach. It was a bunch of rookies running this club for all these years, and maybe you want to change direction. But that said, if you go out and get, say, a Brad Treliving, who happens to be sitting out on the market, a very experienced club runner, he doesn't have the institutional knowledge of, as you point out, what's gone on with this core four. Why hasn't it worked? What are the clues that can lead you to the most obvious and optimal solution to this big problem here of, the stasis that's been in Leafland that can no longer hold? It is a conundrum, isn't it?
It is. And then you mentioned Brad Treliving, who I think would be at least an appealing candidate to talk to. Well, so far the Calgary Flames haven't let him speak to other teams because he is under contract like Kyle Dubas through June 30th. So,
right.
And unless that changes, then I would presume that would hold if Toronto wanted to speak to him, and they'd have to wait until after some of these decisions need to be made. I mean, it is a bind. It's very possible though, because I don't have really good insight into what's been happening on Brendan Shanahan's end, that they already have their candidate in mind. But I can't imagine being thrown into this job and having to decide. I mean, maybe that person decides not to make a quick decision and trade anyone just because they don't have a good feel for things. I mean, that'll be someone else's problem. But I really can't believe we got to this point inside a week, quite honestly. As I said, but as the week went on, it sort of became more apparent I was headed this way. But, Kyle Dubas, really was a part of building this team, off the ice, on the ice. He has his people in place. We know how committed he was to them. And so the fact that he's out with at least apparently some, hand in the decision, I'm stunned we're at this spot.